Why are you torturing me like this? Why?
Well, the pre-season optimism has disappeared after only 4 hours of football. Could you believe it? Essendon is reverting to type. We are seeing, though, at the start of the season what we do normally see towards the end of the season. So it's going to be very interesting to see what the response is going to be this week. I can't say I'm confident, but we're going to talk about the game against Port Adelaide right now.
They all try their best, but they can't get near Essendon Bombers fire.
So grab a drink, grab a snack, grab a beer or a milkshake or a coffee or maybe something even stronger if you're an Essendon supporter, which you'll probably need to get over the big loss on the weekend and what probably looks in store for us this year, and we'll get straight into it. So we've analysed the Adelaide game to death. Obviously, most of you have seen either my review or some of the other Essendon fan channel reviews, and all I can really say about it is that really it's seemed like it was a 100-point loss. It wasn't. It was a 10-goal loss, but it really did seem like it was more than that. We were never in the game, and the lack of effort from the opening bounce really was just palpable, and it was just a very, very disappointing performance, which is why it's going to be so fascinating to see how the club responds this week. I don't think anybody is that confident. I think there will be some sort of response. I don't necessarily think it's about winning the game, but I think it is about the way we perform and specifically about the way we defend. I will say one thing about this upcoming game against the Power is that I do believe after a bad loss, it's to have a short turnaround, and at least then you are able to rectify that loss quickly. You're able to, with a 5-day break, you're able to not dwell on it for 7-8 days.
I want to talk about it. I don't want to think about it.
Or if you had a week off for 14 days, you're able to get out there, and it will ensure that the media, which will be at Essendon this week, is not there for perhaps as long as they would otherwise be, given the short turnaround, and they can hopefully put in an encouraging performance. But really, I'm not confident at all, and especially given the fact that Port Adelaide are one of the teams that have dominated us in recent years. They won't have their best player, of course, Zach Butters, who will be out for another few weeks. But their midfield has really troubled us in recent years. Connor Rosie has really played, out of his skin against us when he plays against us, and they've really towed us up. So we're going to have to be on our game. It is a good thing that we are playing in Melbourne. If we were playing it in Adelaide, I think that would have been a recipe for disaster. So I will be there on Thursday night. I wonder how many of you guys will be there. Let me know in the comments. This is about game 510 or something. I'm not quite counting, but it's something like that for me. I've kind of lost count, but it's definitely over 500.
Dee, why do you put up with it? You could do so much better.
So we're going to get into just exactly what we want to see from Essendon and what we didn't see from them last week. If you like this content, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It helps the YouTube algorithm when you do that. About 80% of the people watching are not subscribed. If you have a look, it takes 1 second to do so. If you click that button right now, 1 second, and guess what? It doesn't cost any money whatsoever, and it will allow me to get up to 1,000 subscribers, which was what I'd like to do, and that will help me to produce more and better content for all of you. So for starters, I think we'd all like to see a bit of a statement made at selection. Now, without going overboard, we don't want to be sacking half the team. You can't do that. But someone like Jackson Pryor, who was a little bit better on the weekend, but he came off a bad game against Hawthorn in a slightly better game, but he probably wasn't quite up to it. I would think would probably need to come out of the team. Menzies as well. I'm not really sure what Menzies offers the team. Lewis Hayes had 16 marks in the VFL on the weekend, so I understand why perhaps Hayes wasn't brought in on the weekend. A lot of people were calling for him to be brought in. I thought perhaps that whilst you could make the case for him to be brought in, with already one first gamer with Edwards in the side and already the youngest side of the round, it would have been a big stretch to bring in 2 first gamers in the one side. But the circumstances are different now. I think that we can't just go in with exactly the same team. There needs to be some changes to the team. A lot of people like to have a go at their various whipping boys. McGrath is a bit of a whipping boy. I know his game wasn't particularly great on the weekend, but I do think, and I've said this before, I think he cops more criticism than what he deserves because he was a number 1 draft pick. If he was a pick 40 in the draft or something like that, he wouldn't be copying the criticism he deserved, and that's not his fault that he was picked up there. So, did he have a great game? No. Is he a senior player? Yes. I mean, he's not a reserve standard player. I think he's better than that. He does frustrate people. Yes, he hasn't been All-Australian, and you would expect someone picked up as the number 1 draft pick at some point in his career to have been an All-Australian, but I wouldn't go so far as to drop him. But I think Hayes coming into the side is a good and bold move. Hobbs has also been struggling. Hobbs has only had 3 kicks in both games. 3 kicks in the Hawthorn game and 3 kicks in the Adelaide game, about 14 possessions in both games. He is a bit of an under player. Doesn't really add a whole lot to our team at the moment, and his position might be in jeopardy as well. Someone like an Angus Clark could possibly come in. Players like Reece Unwin, things like that. But look, we can't have too many first gamers. We had one last week in Edwards, another one potentially coming in Hayes. I don't think we need to go overboard and bring these players in a bit, steadily. I do think there does need to be some sort of statement made at selection. I also think Dylan Shield probably shouldn't be lining up on a halfback flank anymore out of the back line. I don't think from the 4 hours of football, I know it's a small sample size, but I don't really think it seems to be working. He's a natural midfielder. All right, and I think sometimes we do overcomplicate football where we're looking for positions for players that they're not really suited in.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Dylan Shield's been a very, very good midfielder for 10 years, and that's his natural position. That's where he plays his best football. And sometimes when you're struggling and you're down on confidence, the best thing to do is just go back to where you play your best footy. Right? He's a good sort of outside midfielder. He's got a bit of run and carry about him. And we saw last year that even when he didn't play for the first 90% of the year, but the 4 or 5 games that he did play right towards the end of the year, he played pretty well. Right? I think we just need to be playing players in their natural positions rather than mucking around playing in places where they don't need. We also got to work out why Mason Redman is not playing well. Mason Redman hasn't played well since he signed his contract. Now, I'm a kind of believer in the sort of quote that correlation does not equal causation. Now, if you don't know what that means that if A happens and then B happens after A, it doesn't necessarily mean that A caused B. So just because he signed that long contract and then he started playing, at a reduced output doesn't necessarily mean it was because he signed his contract. There are probably other reasons. I mentioned in a previous video, I thought that playing Nick Martin down in the back line last year probably affected Redman's output a little bit more than what he normally would. Redman was that sort of outlet player that would, release us out of the back line more often than not, and he was unable to do that as much last year because Martin was playing, off the half-back line, getting that 25-30 possessions a game. And so far this year, Dylan Shield's been doing that. So really, I just think we need to put Redman back to where he belongs and give him the priority and the expertise to carry out what he knows how to do. Get Martin out of there, get Shield out of there, get Redman back to what he does best, and don't have any other players doing his job for him. And that could go a long way to him playing his best football. So I think we need to make a statement, not just with the selection and not going overboard, but just playing players back in the positions where they play their best football. Play Martin forward, play Redman off halfback, play Dylan Shield in the midfield, drop maybe Hobbs and or Menzies and or Pry, maybe 2 of those 3. Bring in Hayes, and Ridley will come back into the side also. I think there was some suggestion he might not quite be ready with the concussion. I did hear some reports a week or so ago it was 20 days. It was a little bit longer due to the seriousness of the concussion. This is a 5-day turnaround. Let's assume he plays. That'll be 2 or 3 changes to the side. And I think that would go a long way towards giving us an improved performance on Thursday night. So here's a potential type of side I'd like to see: in Hayes, Ridley and Clark, out Hobbs, Pryor and Menzies. Then you're making a statement, but you're not going too overboard. You're just making the 3 changes. One of them is an obvious one. Ridley has to come in, obviously, because he's the team's best defender. And I think that would be a good team. It just depends whether Brad Scott, who can be quite conservative with his players, he seems to love picking Menzies for some reason. I really don't know why. But he is quite conservative with his picks, so we'll see how it goes. It'll be interesting to see how the selection goes on Wednesday night. I imagine Port will be close to unchanged, except for Lukosius, who got injured for the Power. But apart from that, they had a clean bill of health apart from Jack Lukosius, and they've got a good solid team. Connor Rozee, Jace Burgoyne had 32 possessions. Kane Farrell had 31 possessions. Willem Drew, Logan Evans, these sort of players. Jackson Mead, Ollie Wines, Brownlow medalist with 33 touches. Georgiades kicked 4 goals. Willie Rioli kicked 3 goals. Even Sam Powell-Pepper kicked 3 goals. So, I mean, look, they're only up against Richmond, I guess. But Given that they had such an impressive performance, they're not going to have too many changes to their team except for the forced out of Lukosius. If there's any Port supporters watching, what do you think your team is going to be? Who's going to come in for Lukosius? I'd like to see in the comments who you think is going to pick. So, one thing about Essendon last year, we were the number one team for disposals, and we were the number one team for uncontested disposals. This was in 2024. Now, this is not necessarily a good thing. One of the reasons we were the number one team for disposals is because we would chip the ball around, keep possession of the ball, have the most uncontested disposals. By the time we worked the ball forward, often the opposition defence was set, and that's one of the reasons why, and it continues this year, we haven't been able to take marks inside 50, only 6 marks inside 50 in the first game. Hawthorn had 18, only 7 marks inside 50 in the second game against the Crows. The Crows had 20.
60% of the time, it works every time.
And this game plan, I don't think really is working, or at least it needs a tweak. But here's what's interesting. On the weekend, Adelaide kept us to 179 kicks and 172 handballs. Now, obviously, that is a poor ratio of kicks to handballs. Adelaide's own ratio of kicks to handballs was 2-1. They had 254 kicks, 138 handballs, 2-1, and we had 1-1.
That's statistically impossible.
But that is a very, very low number of kicks. I don't think we had that low number of kicks at any point last year. So Adelaide obviously looked at the way we play, limited the amount of uncontested possessions we had. In fact, our uncontested possessions were 40 less than them. And that's our game plan out the window. That's really how we play. So they took our way to play away from us. In fact, Adelaide dominated possession themselves. They had 129 marks and we only had 59 marks. So given that we were the number one team for uncontested disposals and the number one team for disposals, to keep us to only 179 kicks, that really means you're essentially destroying our game plan. You're destroying the way we play, and that's credit to Adelaide for doing that. They obviously set themselves. They obviously didn't allow us to chip the ball around, and we really couldn't work the ball forward in any meaningful way, and we were exposed. Now, I don't necessarily see this as a bad thing because I think it might force Essendon to change. I think what we need to do is move the ball a bit quicker. I think this is obvious. I think if you take too long moving the ball, it gives the opposition defence too much time to set themselves. That's one of the reasons why we can't take uncontested marks in the forward 50, and we just need to be a bit more attacking and a bit more proactive rather than just reacting to what the opposition do. So Port Adelaide absolutely dominated uncontested possessions last week against Richmond. It's a bit hard to judge because they were playing the team that we expect to get the wooden spoon, Richmond. They had 353 uncontested possessions to Richmond's 114. It was just a insane performance, 133 marks to 70. So they really were playing at least against a lesser opponent, but they were able to execute their game probably similar to what the Crows were doing against Richmond, chipping the ball around, maintaining possession, and really not allowing their other team to get the ball. And when they did get the ball, they were under pressure. I mean, Richmond had a very high proportion of their possessions being contested possessions. You actually want a higher proportion of your possessions to be uncontested because you can do more damage that way. So Port will be looking at the way Adelaide played. They'll be looking at how they restricted Essendon's kicking output. We tend to be a kicking team rather than a handballing team, generally speaking. And Adelaide were able to put great pressure on that part of the game, which hopefully will force Essendon into a more attacking style of play. I think we need to do that. I don't think you necessarily have to change everything about the way you play. You don't have to chip the ball around. That doesn't have to be your modus operandi. You're allowed to be attacking and still maintain the basic principles that you were training with all summer. You just need to be a little bit more proactive. So hopefully Adelaide's exposure of Essendon's game plan last week cast a bit of a rocket up the Bombers, and we're able to at least adapt. At least I hope we're able to adapt, because you know that the other teams looking at that are going to be trying to do exactly the same thing. So now we get into the prediction for the match. Well, one thing I do believe, and I mentioned this in my previous video, I do like the phrase, things are never as good as they seem and things are never as bad as they seem. One of the people in the comments told me that this was not a quote from Lee Matthews. It was actually from Alan Jeans, and Lee Matthews obviously got it from Alan Jeans. If that's the case, then that's good information. I didn't know that, but Lee Matthews has certainly picked it up and made it famous. And I do think it's very appropriate in football. We saw on Sunday the Brisbane Lions nearly were defeated by West Coast. West Coast lost by nearly 100 points to Gold Coast in Perth in their first game, and led Brisbane for nearly the whole game and didn't come too far away from causing an upset. We saw St Kilda lose to the Adelaide Crows by 10 goals, the same margin that we lost, and then came out and beat Geelong. So these things can turn around pretty quickly. I've seen it time and time again over the years that I've been watching football. But you just couldn't possibly tip Essendon after the performance that they put up on the weekend. That doesn't mean that we don't expect that they're going to put in an improved performance. It doesn't mean that we don't think they're going to come out hard. I think we're going to see a very, very different Essendon side. But Port was second on the ladder at the end of at the end of the home and away season last year. They did have a poor performance in round 1, but they bounced back in week 2. They do play well against us, and just on the exposed form, you couldn't tip Essendon. So I'm going to be tipping Port Adelaide by 12 points. I think it will be pretty close. I think that we're going to put in a pretty good performance. And look, just looking at some of these, wild fluctuations in form or in performance from some of the sides in the first 2 weeks, it wouldn't be surprising if we won this game. All right? I don't think any of us would be that surprised if we bounce back. It's just that you couldn't possibly tip us based on the exposed form. It would really just be a bit of a hunch. I did tip us against Adelaide last week. That was probably a mistake. I was probably tipping more with my heart than my head. I was pretty obvious that Adelaide was the better side and was set to win the game due to the fact that they had a good, stable side playing well. But on exposed form, you simply have to tip Port Adelaide in this match. I'm hoping we can bounce back. I think it's an important match for the club. If we get blasted out of the park, it is going to cause all sorts of problems. We don't have to win the game, but we certainly have to perform in the game. And if we have a 10-goal loss, it's going to cause all sorts of issues. Social media will be going berserk. The only benefit out of these sort of performances is that we seem to get a little bit more traffic on these Essendon channels on YouTube. But I'm hoping it doesn't come down to that. I do believe we're a chance in this game. I think it will be close. I certainly think our defence will be better because it has to be better. We're under the roof at Marvel. I don't like playing Marvel. I'd rather play at the MCG. But the reality is we do tend to play pretty well at Marvel. And I think the 5-day turnaround will assist us just in order to get that out of the way quickly and get out there and just get right into it. So will you guys be going to the game? I will be there on Thursday. Leave a message in your comments what your prediction is for the game. I think it should be a pretty close game. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how the Bombers fare. Please like and subscribe to this channel. It would be fantastic if you would do that. It will help the YouTube algorithm and it will ensure that these videos appear on your YouTube page automatically. You won't have to do anything. And as always, have a good day and go Bombers.